Hello, I'm Catherine Martinez. It's summertime, so instead of a lesson on something heavy and cerebral, I thought we could celebrate the lazy days of summer and create a fun project with spiral text, circle, and text on path. A little math review as we begin. As we look at the left side of the screen, we see the mathematical equation for the Archimedean spiral starting in the origin and makes a curve with 3 rounds. The distance between the spiral branches are the same. If we look at the right side of the screen, we see how the spiral affects us more in Perfect Embroidery Pro. In PEP, the spiral runs clockwise with its origin or starting point in the center. When we work with spiral text, we first put a text box on the screen. Up here, we'll use our text tool. I'll click in the screen. The font last used is the one showing. I'm going to click up in the text box and type our phrase, the sun, the sand, sweet tea in my hand. I'll click on the font box and go get the font that I'm interested in. It's up towards the top. We'll be playing with the Ben Quiet font. A double click will put that on screen, and the text box shows here in the editing text format where we see all of our symbols and text editing capabilities. By the way, I used sweet tea in my phrase, but if you need to use margarita or glass of Chardonnay, you go right ahead. To change text into spiral, we need to have it selected, come over to our properties for text, and we're using this type. We'll use the drop-down arrow and we're choosing spiral. We go ahead and apply. And here we have the text turned into a spiral, similar to what we saw on that earlier screen. The text itself following that path equidistant from each other. We also see all of the text editing symbols that we've played with in previous videos. Remember how the 2 blue triangles allowed us to move the letters to the right or left? Anywhere in the word, I could rest on those 2 blue triangles and click and drag. From that point forward, I move the rest of the phrase. I'll go ahead and do an undo. You may notice that there are no double blue triangles at the beginning of the phrase itself, in front of the first letter T. There is a trick to that. If we come over here back into the text box and I move to the beginning of the text itself, the trick is to start your phrase with a space using the space bar. I've tapped it once. I'll go ahead and apply. And here you see the difference where we have those 2 blue triangles. What this allows me to do then is to click and drag and move the entire phrase from the beginning over around the spiral. Undo puts that back. I have a slide for us that shows you that so you can see them compared side to side. Again, in the blue, with no space at the beginning of the phrase, we are not given the double blue triangles to move the whole phrase around the spiral. If we go back and put a space at the very beginning of our phrase, then we are given the 2 blue triangles, which allows us to move the entire phrase around the spiral. Coming back into PEP, I'm going to open a file that I've already started for us. Here we'll do fonts compared. I'll turn on my 3D so we can see, and then I will zoom in just a little bit so we can talk about one row of text at a time. We need a font that is easy to read when working with spirals. That might sound elementary, but it's already going to be a challenge to read text in a spiral, so you want to make sure the letters are easily recognizable. Let's compare in this first row. All 3 of these, the red, the green, and the gold, are all using a sans serif font, which means they're straight up and down. They don't have the little extenders that you'll see on a serifed font. Clicking on the red and looking over in our font box, we see that that is the Ben Quiet font, the one that we started with. If we click on the green, looking over into our font box, I see that that is the Empress. Still somewhat easy to read. If we click on the gold, this is a sans serif font, but it's kids, and you can see that we are bordering now on difficulty reading the words in this spiral text. We'll scroll down a little bit and talk about script. We know that script is very pretty. This first one in orange is done in a cursive font. And you can see here where the words the, sand, sweet tea are relatively easy to read. But when we take a look at the characters or letters that are upside down in the spiral, these are not easy to read. Clicking on the brown one, this is done in Diana VS. Very pretty font, again script font, but it is becoming more difficult to read, and certainly the way the letters themselves are formed, the S's aren't as clear as perhaps some of the others. The last one that I have for script is in Isadora, one of my favorites, but we can see that for spiral text it really is not a good choice at all because the letters themselves have a tendency to slant more like an italic, and that sort of adds to the inability to recognize the letters easily. As we scroll down, we'll see two examples of text that has been typed in all caps. You may have heard me say before to be very careful when you're working with all caps. It's very difficult to read. Here in this particular example, you see that the chosen font is the tall, and I think that this is relatively easy to read in this particular font. If we click on the green, now we can see an example of all caps text that is very difficult to read. This is done in the Farfel, a font that I like a lot because it has a little funkiness added to it, but you can see it is a very poor choice when we are working with spiral text. One of the rules I follow for myself, if text is difficult to read as a normal text box, as this is, all caps done in script, then I don't even attempt to put it into spiral text. Let's return to our original spiral, and we'll take a look at some of the other symbols for editing. Just as a refresher, we did talk about the blue triangles. Remember too that you also have the black diamonds. Clicking on one of those allows us to play with individual characters. I can move them, I can size them, whatever it is I need to do there. I am going to undo and put it back in its original. But if we found a letter that was slanted a little odd on the arc, or maybe was too far or too close to the previous one, for example, if we wanted to move this I could take that and just move that over just a little bit. So yes, we have those capabilities. Again, if I click back on the text itself, I see this pink circle. We're going to play with that a little bit, understanding that that pink circle represents the starting point of our spiral. I have a file that I'm going to open to show you another point made with our spirals. We'll turn on our 3D. Here we have the original phrase, and then I've taken that phrase and added some more to it so that we have a little longer spiral. What we want to see here is that regardless of the length of the sentence, the starting point of the spiral is always in the same position. And I can show you that by zooming in just a bit here on our two spirals. I'll go ahead and select our blue one. I'm going to click on the blue, the shorter, and drag it over and drop it right onto the orange one. And we see that, yes, regardless of the length of text, that starting position is the same. Blue is selected. I hit my text edit. There is my pink circle. If I select the orange, turn on my text edit, and I see that that circle is in the same position. Again, regardless of the length of the sentence, the starting point of that spiral will always be in the same position. Let's open another file started for us, and this is simply just the same phrase repeated 3 times. It is the exact same phrase, I just have it in different colors so I can refer to it easily. But you may notice also that I have 2 guidelines placed. They are placed at the beginning of each of the text boxes. To do that, I simply rested within the ruler and clicked and dragged over and dropped it where I want it. I'm bringing these guidelines in to show you something. I want to make sure you're comfortable with the way that spirals act. I'm going to select my first phrase, move over to type, do my drop down and set it to spiral and apply. I can also select more than one phrase at a time. Come over to our type, click on spiral and apply, and I have those changed into spirals as well. First thing I'd like to do is select all three, come up here and do a vertical center align. Double click on our magnifying glass. We'll set the screen so that we can see all of it at one time, and of course I've turned on my 3D. We're going to play now with the editing capabilities, specifically the pink circle. The pink circle is the important symbol in controlling the size and beginning point or origin of our spiral. When I rest on that pink circle, my mouse turns into a two-headed circle, which normally indicates rotation. I'm going to click on that and drag it straight down, let go, and we see that when I have clicked and dragged straight down with that pink circle, I'll click off of that so you can see the results, the spiral is made smaller. The letters spread apart to make it around that smaller arc. We're actually bringing the starting point of the spiral closer to the center point. Again, I'll turn on that text edit and you can see where we have moved that pink circle. We'll try it again on the red one. Again, I'm going to rest on my pink circle, but this time I'm going to click and drag up and let go. And you see that here, when I drag the pink circle up, the spiral is made larger. The letters are more in line with each other because they don't have to curve around a smaller arc. The starting point is further from that center point. We'll play again with our blue original. Let me zoom in just a little bit. And we play again with those blue triangles. Remember, we put a space to start that phrase, and that's what gave us these two blue triangles at the beginning. If I click and drag just the blue triangles around the arc down towards the bottom and I let go, what has happened is that the entire phrase has moved around the arc, but we have not altered the size of the arc at all. Let me back out just a bit. We made that change with the blue triangles, and here is the starting position, whereas when we moved the pink circle itself, we altered that starting position. Can you tell where this sentence or phrase now begins at a larger part of the arc, so the letters themselves are not squeezed so close together or sometimes spread apart, as you see over here in the word the? This is a little different control that we have on our text in the spiral. If we like the size of the spiral, we can simply play with some minor adjustment to where that phrase begins. Obviously, if I take that and move it even further around the arc, I no longer am starting on that beginning portion or area of the arc. I've spread that out, but you can see that the text is getting longer going around the arc itself. The longer the spiral, the less curve to the arc, the easier it is to read the words. By playing with those blue triangles, we have moved the letters around from the original point without changing the size of the spiral. All right, now that we understand how spiral text works, let's finish creating our block. We'll go ahead into our design number 1, which was our original phrase, and let me show you where we're headed. This is the look we're going to be after with our spiral text. Keep that in mind as we go back into our design. I'm going to be using my 8-inch square hoop to make sure that the sun applique that I create is within that hoop. I'll come over here to our hoop tool, find that 200 by 200 hoop that I have for my Baby Lock machine. I'll go ahead and OK that, and that helps set the boundaries when I am creating something from nothing. Let me select the spiral. I know that I want to come over here to transform and size that to a 4.25. Here you see the sizes of the spiral. I have a different width from the height, and of course by mere definition of a spiral that's always going to happen. It's not a perfect circle. If I have a certain size that I need to work with, in this case 4.25, I always take the higher measurement, this being the width, and I type in the size that I need, knowing that that size will fit regardless of what the other measurement is. It will be lower. I have the text selected. I can now take my rotate pink circle again, but I'm not within text edit. This time I'm in normal select, and we can tell that by the black handles. But I'm going to click and drag that spiral around so that the text begins reading from the left towards the right. Again, I might just alter that just a hair so that I'm starting at the left. Turn on my 3D so you can read it a little easier. Now this is just a me thing. I like my spiral text to start at the left and then move around and around towards the right. Again, remember, in a clockwise direction. To me, this just makes sense because we read from left to right. You can do it the way you'd like it. If you think it should be beginning at the top, or if you like it beginning at the bottom, that certainly is up to you. The next thing we're going to do is add a circle for this center portion of the sun. I'll come up to my artwork, click on the drop down arrow. I'm going to choose ellipse, change my color to green. I'm holding down the control key while I drag my circle. That will give me a perfect circle. I'll select it, come over here and check its size. I know that I want it to be a 5-inch. These measurements are the same because it is a perfect circle, so it doesn't matter which one I pick. Go ahead and apply that 5. Come up on my ruler, right click, choose the center origin. Now, normally, if I have two things like this, I would have selected both and centered them within themselves, or do the center origin. If I have both images in the center, to me they look a little off center, and this will always happen with a spiral because, again, it's going to be very rare that you can get an even spiral. So sometimes I will take my text and move it over myself, maybe off center just a little bit, until I feel that the design looks like it's in the center. I'm going to twist that just a little bit to rotate that and see if I can get a better placement for myself. And there, I think I like it. To me, visually, that looks more centered than if I was precisely centered. Again, that's a me thing, and you can decide which way you prefer. This sunshine needs some rays of sun. We could draw our own, but I hear you out there. I can't draw. So let's go ahead and use Perfect Embroidery Pro to its fullest. Coming up here to New, we'll come into a clean screen. I'm also coming over here to our backdrop tool, selecting that, and I'm brought into our bitmap folder. Let me review for you how we got here. If I use the drop down, you'll see that I've started at the hard drive, dime folder, then an images folder, and then the bitmaps folder, and this is where I am now resting. The design that I want is this flower design number 1. We'll go ahead and double click that and it brings it to screen, but remember this is in our backdrop tool, so it's sort of under the glass and I can trace over it. One of the tools I have for our backdrop is to shade that a little less, and I'll apply. I'm not really concerned with all the colors that were in there. I just want to be able to see that outer ring of the triangles. Coming up here to my pen, I'll click on Artwork Pen. Also, I'll right click on my red thread to become my drawing tool. Wherever I begin drawing will be my starting point of the embroidery itself. So I will start down here at the bottom. I'm going to click once at the base of the triangle, come up to the triangle, go down to the base, move over one to the next triangle, come up to the top, down, over, out, in, over, out, in, and so forth. Notice that I am not terribly concerned where I'm putting my points. There's a couple reasons for this. I'm going to end up with funky sun rays, so I'm not really concerned about the precise points of that. If that concerns you, you certainly take a little bit more time to trace yours. I'll click my final point that I'm going to make with the drawing tool. I'm hitting the letter C on my keyboard for close. So that went ahead and closed that open design. Coming over here to our toolbox, I'll click on backdrop and that took it off. It's still there. I can toggle that on and off as I see fit. but I look at my sun rays and I'm pretty happy with that. Let me get my select tool, come up here to copy, back into our first design, up here to paste. It's too small, which is fine. Come over here to properties, transform, and I want to make that a size 7.75. So I'll use the higher measurement or the larger measurement there. 7.75 is going to fit within my 8-inch hoop. The next thing I want to do, because I created it after my other two portions, it's going to stitch out last. Logically, it needs to stitch out first. So I'll come up here to my toolbar and choose to move it to back, which means it will stitch out first. The next thing I want to do is a little bit of point edit. You can see where the bottom points of the triangle are within the circle, which is what I wanted to happen. Let's zoom in just a little bit. We'll use our shape tool. I'm simply going to grab those points and move them a little closer to the circle. I don't want to lay them on top. I do want them hidden by the yellow fabric, but I don't want so much of the orange to show through. I certainly can select both and move them at one time. If they're a little wonky, I might want to just move them individually. Let me scroll down and take a look at the bottom half here. These are pretty good. I'll move those a little closer. These are wonky, so I'll use the individual points to move them. And notice as I'm making this wider between the 2 points, I'm altering the shape of the triangle. Again, I don't care because it's just going to be a fun project. You would spend as much time here as you needed to. I'm just going to move them closer to my circle. We'll go ahead and zoom out to check what I have done to see if I really like the look of it. I'm going to select my sun rays, come over to my properties and choose the fabric button. You can see here that with my ellipse, and I click on that, my fabrics come up. Yours might take a little longer to load. I've been playing in mine, so they're readily available. I'll double click on the orange and there are my sun rays, which of course also fills in the center. If you like this look, you don't even have to do that center yellow circle. You could leave it like this and just have your text stitch on your fabric. I'm going to use that center circle, so I select it, come back up to my fabric, go into my ellipse, scroll down just a little bit and get more of a yellow circle, and this is what mine's going to look like, except of course the sequence is not correct. I need that text to stitch out last, so I select it, come up here and tell it to move it to the last position. This then is the proper sequence of this project. The sun rays, the center, and then the text will stitch out on the last part of the fabric. Now I talked about making some funky sun rays, not being real concerned when I was drawing. If you like this symmetrical look of these triangles, then you won't want to do this part. You could be finished right now. But to show you some of the other options that you have, let me select the orange, go back into shape, and now I can play with some of these points. If I do a right click on that point and come down to smooth, I can grab one of those handles and drag it in, and I create more of a funky point, and I can pull that up a little higher, play with another perhaps, smooth, and see what I get when I'm just playing. There is no right or wrong here. Perhaps I want to take one of those points and drag it larger and maybe off center a bit for the triangle. Or I could go in and right click and add a point and drag that point out just a bit, and maybe add another one on this side and drag that in for some different looking rays of the sun. Again, this is up to you, but this is an area where we can play and have fun and make your sunshine the way that you would like it. The sequencing is important. We take a look over here at our objects. If I expand the sun rays by clicking on the plus for the circle, you can see that I still have these two parts as artwork. So let's select them. I'll hold down my control key to get both. I'm going to right click, convert to run, come over here to properties, change that to a bean stitch, and I am going to make that a 3.5 length and apply it. You also notice that my fabric goes away, which is fine because this is going to be a run stitch that anchors down my fabric. I did not convert this project to a true applique because I do want it to be raw edge. I like that look, very much like the fiber that results from that. But if you wanted to make yours traditional, then instead of turning it to a run, you would do your right click, convert to applique, and there you have the traditional 3 parts of your applique: your placement line, your tack down line, and of course your satin edging. You certainly could do that to the sun rays. You could do a combination of the raw edge for the sun rays and traditional applique, satin stitch for the center, whatever it is that you would like to do. If you are going to treat this as a true applique, you're going to have to play around with the points. Let me zoom in here so you understand what I'm saying. If I was going to make this red an applique as well, I'll do the right click, convert that to applique. You're going to have to address these points right in here. You would not want that sun rays to be stitching so closely under the sun center itself. So what you would want to do is work with these points, bring them outside of the circle, and even maybe smooth them out a bit so that the satin stitch on one applique is not going to interfere with the satin stitch on the other applique. Something to think about if you're going to do something other than the raw edge applique. For my project, I did not need the placement and the tack down stitch. I'm going to undo a couple of these and put these back to our raw edge as we had them. At this point, you would go ahead and do your file, save as, and then name our sun, whatever it is that we wanted to call it. You have saved it as a C2S. You can tell right here down at the tab itself will give us the file name. And then to finish that procedure, you would do your file, save as, choose your proper machine format. In my case, it would be a PES file, and I would save that. Now I would be ready to stitch out that portion. Now that sun represents our first block of this particular project. Let's go ahead and create our second block. We'll come into a new screen, and we'll begin by making the design line for this second block. We're coming over here to Library down at the bottom. Scroll down until I see the Perfect Embroidery Pro Free Designs. A right click in the display portion and I choose Show Contents. That will bring me into the folder holding the free designs that come with PEP. As a reminder, where I am, starting on the hard drive, C:, into the dime folder, Designs, Perfect Embroidery Pro Free Designs. The one that I want is close to the bottom, so I'll go ahead and scroll down, and here it is. Hit the beach. It is number 83546. I'll double click that to bring it to screen, and I'm going to select, oops, let me try that again, get a little lower on my square, and click and drag up to select just the flip-flops. I'll do a copy, new, paste, and do you see here that I have this little bit of cling on right there that I want to get rid of? So I will select it, click and drag around it, and simply hit the delete on my keyboard, and now I have just the flip-flops. Selecting both, come up here and do a group. I'll come over back to my sequence portion. To work with these flip-flops to create a line, come up to our tool marked repeat. We'll click on that. I have done a previous video on this repeat feature. It was in 2015, so you can take a look for that. Here for this project, I am going to up the number across to 4, and I'm going to decrease the numbers down, or the rows, to 1. So I have 4 repetitions and I have 1 row. Something else I'd like to deal with. Do you notice that at certain points here, the flip-flops are very close, almost touching? I'm going to come over to distance between center, turn that check mark on, and then come up to my horizontal distance and make that 1.75. Put a 0 in my vertical distance. Apply it. And you see that the flip-flops spread apart a little bit, and I'll go ahead and OK and come back to screen. With all of them there, I will group those 4 as one so I can move them around and play if I need to do that. We will create our text boxes. The first box, the phrase is going to be some of the best memories. I'll go ahead and choose the font that I want. Here we're going to play with Bauhaus. Having double-clicked, it brings the text to screen. I am going to select it with the Select key and grab a diagonal black handle and drag so that that phrase is fitting over the length of the flip-flops. By dragging the diagonal handle, not only did I change the width of the text box, but also the height. I'll drag that down just a little bit here. Some of the other things that I'd like to change come into the density and drop that down to 3 and apply. That's the first portion of my phrase. I have a second portion. So instead of creating a brand new text box and having to do all of those changes to the properties, I'm simply going to copy, paste, change that second one to a red, drag it down and position it, and then it's very easy for me to go back into the text box up here and type in the remainder of the phrase. And that is are made in flip-flops. And I'll go ahead and apply. And once again, it was easy for me just to copy paste the original text box with all of those changes in it and simply change the words. I'll select all 3 items, come up here to my horizontal center align, click on that, and then I will go ahead and do a center align. And here are my 3 portions of our second block. There are 2 ways to create text on path. I'll show you both. We'll start with the lower text. We come up here to artwork, use our drop down and grab our pen, and we simply are going to draw our path. I'll try to follow the ups and downs of the flip-flop line, clicking and then moving, and holding down my control key will allow my points to be curved. So I'll just put a couple in there where I think that they might be fun. A right click will end that line. I can use my shape tool and alter any of those points as I'd like. Again, taking my select tool and selecting both my artwork path, holding my control key down and selecting the red text, I'm going to do a right click. Whenever you have a piece of artwork and a text box selected at the same time, you are going to see this option, text on path. I'll go ahead and select it, and you'll see that my text has adhered pretty much to the path that I have drawn, but it definitely needs a little bit of tweaking. To get to the path itself, I'm going to do a right click and ask to edit the baseline. Now I see my points, and I can move this to be a little longer line if I'd like. I can do a right click and add a point. I'm going to move that up and move this down just a little bit so I have a little bit more of a hump, and maybe move that a bit, make it smooth with a right click. In order to have my changes adhere to the text, what you need to do is to click on a letter itself, and we see the changes made there. Also, I'm in text edit mode, so if I felt the need to expand or change any of these portions of my text, I can do so. This seems a little congested right here with the word flip, so I'll grab those 2 headed triangles and move that over just a little bit. That might have been just a bit too far, and maybe move the IP over just a hair. Again, maybe play with that L just a little bit, and we can play with those individual characters as we think necessary. If I wanted to make that E a little closer, I can just move an individual character. Again, I'm going to click on the text, and those changes are made. Then I'll go ahead and get my select tool so that I can click and drag that whole phrase up, still on my path, but I can do my other editing as well. Click on that rotate button and maybe move it just a little bit, and I see a bit more of the dip at the start and the end. Method number 2 is to select the text box, come over here to the properties, use the drop down, and one of our options is path. I'll click on path and click on apply. You don't see a drastic change, but if I come over here to my text edit, I can do a right click, choose to edit the baseline. I have 1 point showing there. I'll go ahead and right click to add a point at this position, maybe move this one over a bit, and then do a right click and add another point and bring an arc. One of the other things you'll notice a lot when you do this path this way is you have a bit of extension onto the end. So I'm simply going to bring that in and smooth that out just a bit. Scrolling over so we can see. Again, we are not going to hit the apply key, but rather I click on any one of those characters and my text adheres to that path. I can select it and now treat it as its own text box. Once again, I'm going to select all of those and come up here to do a horizontal center, back off just a little bit so we can see what we have for our second block, and I think that looks cute. So at this point, we would do our file save as, give it a name as our C2S file, and then repeat that procedure to save in a machine format. Let's talk a bit about the stitching process of this particular block. We see those flip-flops. We have repetition of each of those flip-flops. I'm going to select that group and copy it, bring it over to a new screen so I can talk about just the flip-flops with the other things not being in the way. Here we have them. They are grouped. First, I'll come up and ungroup them. And now you see the expansion of each of those sets of flip-flops. They're going to repeat the colors for each set. Remember, there are 4 sets there. With them ungrouped, they are going to stitch out each individual color by itself. So let me do a slow redraw and I'll drag across the screen and you'll see that it does one gold and then the green and the pink, and then one gold, the green and the pink, and the black outline, and so forth. And it continues to do each of those sets of flip-flops as one. On your machine, you're going to have a number of thread changes. So you may be tempted to do a resequence by color, coming under Edit, coming down to Resequence by Color, and Apply. And the difference here is you've seen all of the gold together, all of the green, all of the pink, and so forth. So when we go to stitch out, we are doing all of the gold across our fabric, comes back and does all the green across our fabric, all the pink, and then filling in with the highlight, and then finally the black outlines of all of those areas. I would guard against doing that resequence by color. What happens when it stitches like this? Take a look again. I have a lot of movement from left to right. It goes back left to right, goes back left to right, and it does that for each of those 5 colors. What happens is we run the risk of having a registration issue, meaning those black lines on those small areas of the flip-flops might be off just a bit. I chose not to do a resequence by color. In other words, let me do an undo. And I have many thread changes in those sets, but what happened, I was dead on with my registration outlines. I had no issues whatsoever because I did not add that additional pull on the fabric by going back and forth from left to right, from left to right, from left to right. Whereas we have that wonderful resequence by color, you have to think logically. Sometimes it is not to your benefit to do that. Let's see how that project was put together. Here we have the finished project. Our sunshine is on the top with our spiral text, and then we have our text on path at the bottom with our flip-flops. I do have the sunshine mounted on an 8-inch square wrapped canvas. And then this black rectangle at the bottom is simply a black rectangle where I had a backing stitched around the outside, left it opening for turn, and then did that. And then I had some fun braided ribbon that I attached the floating black rectangle, which is flat. It has no batting in it, and I simply glued it to the back of my wrapped canvas. That gave a little bit more dimension to my project. If you notice this embroidered button in the center, I'll come back to that. In looking at the steps, because I knew I was going to use a wrapped canvas, I needed to leave extra space around the fabric. The canvas itself is a 8-inch square, so I cut a 14-inch square of base fabric, which is the black, and hooped that with the tearaway stabilizer. That left me about 2.5 inches on all sides to wrap around that canvas. I then floated an 8.5-inch fabric square for the sun rays on top of the black, and I stitched the sun rays outline. Once that was stitched, I floated a 7.5-inch fabric square, as you see here, the yellow, which is for the center of the sun, and then on that fabric stitched out the circle to anchor that down, and then the spiral text. Here you see that I've trimmed the excess applique fabric away, not quite 1/4 inch away from the stitching. This is what I do. I use a raw edge applique often, and if you cut too close to the stitching, you simply don't see the stitching at all. And I normally want that to show, therefore I use that almost 1/4 inch away from the stitching. I took a chenille brush and then frayed all of those fabric edges to get that roughed up sun look. To finish it, I laid the completed sun design face down on my table and centered the 8-inch canvas face down onto the sun, centered both of them, brought the excess fabric to the back of the canvas and stapled it, and then again you see that optional button. For the lower portion, the flip-flop design, I created a finished rectangle that was 8 inches wide to match the canvas, and then I have about a 1 inch above and below each of the text on path, and then used a fun braided ribbon to finish that off. All I did here with the ribbon is stitch across in this portion, this area right in here, in black thread to adhere my rectangle to my ribbon. I have a knot tied at each end, and once again I simply glued that ribbon to the back of the canvas. This part is flat against the wall. Of course, the canvas stands out a little bit, almost 1 inch, so it gave a lot of dimension to this particular project. Now, I have one more project with text. We'll come back into PEP. From here, we're going to open a design I already have started for the button. What you see here are 2 circles. Go ahead and turn on my 3D. My covered button is 1.5 inches, so I've created an artwork ellipse in that size. I copy pasted that circle, changed it to a 2.5 inch, and converted that one to a run. If you've purchased covered buttons before, you know you get a little cardboard template on the back for the size you should cut your fabric in order to have enough fabric to wrap to the back and capture with the button back. This second circle is my template. I simply cut the fabric out on the stitched line. The sun comes from our symbols. Using our drop down and select, they are in alphabetical order, so I'll go ahead and scroll all the way down to our sun. A double click brings it to screen. If I do a click and drag to the size that I think I want, this is another reason I use this 1.5 inch artwork to give me the design area for the button top. I simply created that sun, and then you see some extra stitching on top of it. That is nothing more than the letter O. If you take a look over here, you see that it is Properties Text. It is in a Bauhaus font, and I've also done a couple things to it to get it to look a little bit more textured in the middle. I have come under the second fill, changed my density to something a lot larger, to a 1 millimeter, and I also went in to the column and chose the jagged type both. That means both inside and outside of the letter will have the jagged edge, and I bumped that value up to 1 millimeter as well. Where it shows orange on the screen, I actually did stitch it in the gold that matched, and it gave just a little bit more texture to the middle of that sun. So if you like that covered button added to your project, that's how easy it is to make. Again, I'm going to open a document that I already have created, and I want to show you something that I do quite often, and it may help you as well. When I'm putting together a project and I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it, I create a layout page in Perfect Embroidery Pro. First, I created rectangles with artwork, and you can see I have one large one and then two smaller ones over here. When I created that artwork, I also went back into our fabric and simply chose a color that I wanted to play with. It also is an easy way for me to audition colors. Since we do have the black, I'll go ahead and cancel out of that, but I did the same for each of those artwork rectangles. Then it allows me to see, do I want the project on one big rectangle and have this be a single panel for the wall, or do I want to break it up into multiple rectangles? Also, it allows me to play with the idea of increasing the size of my rectangle. Maybe I wanted to put them a little lower on the wall hanging and then leave some area for another border of some sort. These particular palm trees come from your free designs in PEP. Same place we got the flip-flops. I could do something like that. Or I could play around with a row of umbrellas that came from your symbols, and I could see if I like that look or not. This is where I came up with the idea of having two separate blocks, and then once I broke that into two separate blocks, I do like to play with wrapped canvas quite often, so that became my decision to put this sunshine on wrapped canvas and then to create a second rectangle that would allow me to attach this in some way. My original idea was to put a little bit of chain between these two rectangles, but then I found that fun summer braided ribbon and I used that instead. So this I do quite often. Again, coming into PEP and allowing myself to play with the tools, audition my designs and colors and so forth. It allows me to help design the project before I get to the machine. And really, I use Perfect Embroidery Pro as my one-stop shop for everything that I want to do, to create the embroidery as well as to design the project and then lay it out, auditioning colors and placement and so forth. I'm going to open a design I already have started for us. This last project we're going to play with circles, a little different than our spiral. To show you how it's done and some of the thoughts that you can have about your circles, here is one very long text box with the words I want to use in our project. I've placed 3 spaces in between each of those words themselves. To change a text box to circle, we have it selected. Come over to our properties, use our drop-down arrow for type. This time we're going to choose circle. I'll go ahead and apply that. I am going to zoom out so we can see where that went. This will happen for you when you create a circle. It does an arc up at the top in a large radius. If I leave it like that, you can see some of the fun that you can have if you do multiples of this first portion of a circle. But if I truly wanted to make that a full circle, I go back into our text edit, grab that pink circle again. I'm going to drag straight down, and when I do, I am changing the radius of the circle, but I'm also watching down here at the bottom to where my words got close to each other. I can see a full circle created there. When I started this project, I actually started with this phrase and this big circle, but then I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I did a circle within a circle? Sort of went to this look. And to get this look, I needed to break down my full text box into 2 shorter ones. We'll zoom in and you can see what I've done here. I'll grab this circle and move it out of our way. And these are the 2 text boxes. They are separate text boxes. They're done the same way, the same text. I'm using a Times font, and again I have those 3 spaces in between the individual words. I'm going to select both of those and copy them onto a new screen so we can play with them and create our next project. I'll start with the blue. Once again, it is selected. I come over to my type, drop down, choose circle, apply. I need to zoom out to see it. And I know that I need to back out even a little bit more for us to see that full circle. So here I'll come up to my text edit, grab that pink circle, drag it down, again watching those two bottom words until they're close to each other, and I've created my first circle. Let's do the same with my second text box. Over to Type, Circle, Apply. Grab that pink circle, drag it down until my words are very close together. I'll let go there. Select both of them. I'm going to center them and then right-click Center Origin. And now we see both of our circles. We could stop there, but there's a couple of edits that I'd like to do. First of all, let's go ahead and select our blue. Turn on my 3D here. I'm going to grab that rotate button and drag the circle around because my favorite word in this grouping is unwind. So I want that to be at the top. All I did is rotate the full circle. I didn't change sizes or the letters or any of that. I also can read the word breathe and relax very easily. Come over to Transform. I know I'm putting this project on an 8-inch square wrapped canvas again, so I'm going to size the blue one to be a 7.25, 7.25, and apply. Now let's select the red circle and play with that a bit. Come over to our properties and we see this other option available, reverse direction. I'll put a check mark in there and do an apply. And take a look and see what has happened. Can you tell that on this red circle where we've done the reverse direction, the top of the letters are to the inside of the circle? Rather, if you look at the blue, which we did not reverse direction, the top of the letters are to the outside of the circle. So a little different way to see your circles. I think it's kind of fun. I like that I have the inner one different than the outer one. But also in this case, I'm going to rotate that red circle because the word I like in this circle as my favorite is the word exhale. So this is down at the bottom. I can see I brought everything out of center, so I'll select both and once again do a center align. And I like the look of those two circles. I know I have my blue circle sized. Let me go into my transform for my red circle, and the red one, I'd like that to be 5.25, and I'm almost there. So 5.25 and apply, and I look good. The only thing missing is something in the center. Let me get another text box, and I'm going to type in the word over here in my text. Type in the word Basque. I know I want a different font. The one I want is called Gesture Pro, so I'll scroll up into alphabetical order. Here we have it. I'll change the color by right-clicking on the green. Also going to go into the density and bring that down just a bit and OK it. And I'll drag that word and drop it into the center. I like this font. It's a little funky, but in this case it's different from the very structured Times font that makes the two circles. It does run a little on the thin side, so here's a trick that we can use. I have shown you this before. If you come over to your pull push and change the pull compensation, I'm going to use percentage and bump that up to 150%. Watch what happens to the word Basque now when I hit apply, and you see it got a little thicker. Actually, to me it looks like we've added the attribute bold to this particular text. So it's going to make it just a little bit thicker without changing the funky offset to it that I like. We'll go ahead and get our select tool, and I will right click and center origin that as well to make sure that everything is as it should be. The final thing we need to do for this project is to create an outside stitched circle. I'll come up to artwork, drop down ellipse, again holding down my control key and drawing a circle. I will select it and change the color to purple. Come over to our transform, and I need that circle to be a 7.75. Remember, we are on that 8-inch canvas. I'll go ahead and apply. I'll right click, convert to run. I am going to make that a little smaller stitch because I'm using this to anchor the back of the circle to the front of the circle, and I need it to be tight because I'm going to turn it right side out. So we'll do an apply. And of course the final thing then is to center origin so that that circle text will stitch out. If you find that that's not enough space, perhaps you would want to make that blue circle just smaller a bit. It's at a 725. Maybe a 7 would give you a little bit more room. Again, I'll do that apply and you can decide. At this point, there is no right or wrong. It is your project and you can decide sizes and so forth. Certainly, if you're using a different size canvas, maybe a 10-inch square, you would want your project larger. The other thing, too, to point out is I purposely used all caps on my two circles because I think it really defines the edges of those circles. There are no ascenders and descenders in any of the words, so it gives a nice, crisp, visual edge to these two circles. We could be finished here, leaving our outside circle as blue and our inside circle as red, but there is another feature that we have in Perfect Embroidery Pro when we work with text, and it's just very fun. So let's review that. I'll select the blue circle. We're going to come up here to our Properties Commands. Come down to this area right here that says color change. We've seen this before, but this particular circle project is ideal. We'll use our drop down arrow and choose words and apply. And we see that it changes every word to a different color. Let's do the same for our red, and this time we'll go into commands, again color change, and apply it to words, and we see the changes. You can see over here in sequence view that what was the blue circle, the first one, is still considered color number 1, which over on our thread chart is the blue. The first word in the sequence, unwind, is in blue, and then it follows that thread chart of blue, red, green, orange. We do have one issue right here because it sees hangout as two separate words, so it went ahead and changed that to yellow. What we would need to do on our machine is watch out for that, and instead of making that a yellow, simply do it in the same color that you stitch out the word hang. If you look at the second circle, the one that was red, we can see that the sequence is indicating color number 2, which is red on our thread bar. If you look at the circle, the word quiet is the first word in the sequence, and it started it with that red. I like that better. I think that's a little bit more fun for what we're trying to say here. At this point, we would go ahead and do our file Save As, give this circle a name. I'll just add to what I have there. Certainly go back into our file Save As again and save it with our machine format. We're ready then to stitch out. Here is our finished project. To begin, we simply hoop up our base fabric. In this case it was white for me, and you're going to stitch out all of your words, the two circles and the center text. You'll then float an 8.5-inch square of matching fabric over the embroidery. Again, this is if you have an 8-inch canvas. You see that that embroidery is showing through that upper piece of backing fabric. You'll then stitch the last circle that we put in, and you can see it here done in gray thread. By doing this, we've made it easy for us to turn our circle right side out and to have a very smooth, even edge around those circles. I took a soluble marker and drew a large X on the backing fabric. When you take it out of the hoop, you're going to lift up the backing fabric and very carefully make a snip just in the backing fabric, and then cut that slit on your marked X. You'll also want to trim the excess away from your stitching, about 1/8 of an inch away. By doing that, leaving so little, we really don't even have to go back and clip those edges for our circle. Turn the circle right side out through the slit X that you've done. It does help if you have some kind of turning tool like the one I have shown here. You'll press your circle, and you now have a freestanding circle, but more importantly one with a very even edge, almost a perfect circle. to finish, I took that circle and hot glued it to a white 8-inch canvas on point, as you can see here. I found some fun braid in my stash and again used that hot glue gun, ran a very small bead of hot glue on the edge, both on the fabric and the canvas, and pressed down that ribbon. The ribbon was such that it frayed very nicely, so I left extra and then glued a little jewelry finding there and put that extra braiding to make a faux tassel. Now you have 2 fun projects. Again, if you are not new to my work, you know I have confessed many times that I am a word nerd. I love to play with text, and these text types, circle text, spiral text, text on path, they just call my name. So have fun with these blocks. Make your projects as you would like, and it's summertime, so be sure to follow the messages on our wall art. Thanks for being with me in this video. Enjoy the rest of your summer.